Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku unlocked Adaptive Instinct Mode, CH. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The air in the unforeseen simulation joint's urban disaster zone, nicknamed the Concrete Jungle by the students, was thick with the artificial haze of theatrical smoke and the low hum of stressed infrastructure. It was a sprawling labyrinth of mock skyscrapers, collapsed overpasses, and streets littered with propped cars and rubble. For the combined hero course students of classes 1A and 1B, it was the most complex training exercise of the year. The scenario: a coordinated villain attack featuring seismic quirk aftershocks. The objective was threefold: rescue trapped civilian dummies, neutralize designated student villains, and secure the area. Izuku Midoriya, his full cowling crackling around him at a stable 20%, moved in a low crouch behind a derelict bus. His green lightning illuminated the grime on the vehicle's side, his mind a frantic storm of calculations. Okay, so Todoroki-kun is handling the fire suppression on the east side, which frees up Kaminari-kun and Tetsu-kun to establish a perimeter around the collapsed subway entrance. He muttered, his voice a low, rapid-fire drone. Uraraka-san and Ajiri-san are on primary search and rescue in Sector Gamma. Bakugo is being Bakugo, probably blowing up the student villains faster than they can register their roles. The main problem is Monoma. As if on cue, the phantom-like laughter of Nito Monoma echoed from a nearby rooftop. Still muttering to yourself, Class 1A? I suppose when you have to think so hard just to keep up, it's understandable. My class, on the other hand, operates with natural, fluid brilliance. Kendo, her large hands poised to act, sighed from her position near Monoma. Just stick to the exercise, Monoma. Deku allowed himself a small, tense smile. The rivalry was fierce, but it was a familiar, almost comfortable friction. This was training. This was safe. His greatest challenge was coordinating his team while managing his own output, and trying, still mostly failing, to get a feel for Black Whip without it having a temperamental life of its own. Focus, Midoriya, a voice said over his earpiece. It was Aizawa, his tone as dry as sandpaper. Your team is scattered. You're the command node. Act like it. Right, sensei. Deku chirped back, shaking his head to clear the analytical fog. He took a deep breath, about to call out a new set of instructions, when the world went silent. It wasn't a gradual quiet. It was an instantaneous, jarring cessation of all sound, as if the universe had a mute button and someone had just slammed it. The hum of the facility, the distant explosions from Bakugo, Monoma's taunts, all gone. In their place, a low, guttural thrumming began, a sound that resonated not in his ears but deep in his bones. A swirling vortex of purple and black mist, impossibly dark against the gray cityscape, tore open in the central plaza. It was a sight seared into his memory, a gateway to terror. Kurogiri, panic, cold and sharp, lanced through Deku's chest. This is not part of the exercise! He screamed into his comm, his voice cracking. All students code red! League of Villains attack! This is real! From the observation deck high above, Shota Aizawa was already moving. Vlad, get the kids out! Seal the exits! He barked, his capture weapon already unfurling. But it was too late. Before the emergency shutters could fully descend, the warp gate vomited forth its contents. A dozen low-level thugs spilled out, cackling and brandishing weapons, but they were just the appetizer. The main course emerged last. It wasn't a hulking mass of muscle like the USJ Nomu. This creature was leaner, more refined, its exposed flesh a patchwork of dark gray sinew and gleaming chrome. Wires and glowing conduits snaked across its body, pulsing with a sickly yellow light. Its head was a smooth, featureless ovoid, save for a single, massive optical lens that swirled with complex geometric patterns. It was less a beast of rage and more a machine of analysis. It scanned the area, its lens dilating and contracting as it processed the dozens of student signatures. Bakugo, never one for patience, was the first to engage. DKU! Get the extras! The big one's mine! He roared, blasting himself towards the new Nomu with a series of concussive explosions. He corkscrewed through the air, unleashing a pinpoint AP shot. The Noma didn't even flinch. It tilted its head, and its left arm, ending in a razor-sharp blade, moved in a blur. It didn't block the blast, it sliced it. The compressed energy of the AP shot was bisected, detonating harmlessly against the buildings on either side. The Noma's lens flashed, seemingly recording the data. What the? Bakugo snarled, thrown off balance by the impossible defense. The Noma countered. Its leg shot out, not with overwhelming force, but with calculated precision, striking the exact point on Bakugo's trajectory that would send him tumbling into a pile of rubble. It was a move of pure, cold physics. This thing was different. This thing was smart. Deku's blood ran cold. His mind, which had been a useful tool seconds before, was now a liability, trying to process 1,000 variables at once. It's an anti-quirk weapon. It analyzes and calculates counters in real time. Speed is useless if it knows where you'll be. Power is useless if it can be deflected. We need a multi-pronged, unpredictable assault. Todoroki-kun, on your left! Ice wall, now! Deku yelled, seeing the Noma shift its attention to the dual quirk user. Shoto reacted instantly, a glacier of jagged ice erupting from the ground. The Noma didn't try to break it. It simply stomped the ground, the force of its impact shattering the base of the wall. With a flick of its bladed arm, it sent massive shards of ice hurtling back towards Shoto and the other students like shrapnel. Kirishima and Tetsutetsu hardened their bodies, tanking the icy projectiles to protect the students behind them, their skin groaning under the impacts. The Noma's lens flashed again. Data point, hardening quirks. Test durability limits. It was a nightmare. Every move they made, every quirk they used, was just feeding the creature more information, making it more efficient, more deadly. Deku charged in, green lightning flaring. He had to draw its attention. "I'm your opponent!" he shouted, feinting a right kick before channeling power into a 20% Delaware smash. The Noma's head snapped towards him. Its lens swirled. It had seen him use this power before, on television, in Kamino. It crouched low, and just as Deku's flick of compressed air shot forward, the Noma used its own bladed arms to shear through a support pillar of a nearby overpass. The massive slab of concrete and rebar fell directly into the path of his attack, absorbing the force in a cloud of dust. Deku's eyes widened in horror. It wasn't just countering them. It was using the environment with flawless, tactical genius. He pushed off, trying to get close. He threw a punch, and the Noma sidestepped with minimal effort, his fist whistling through empty air. He tried to unleash Black Whip, the dark tendrils lashing out from his arm, but the Noma's blades moved in a silver arc, severing them before they could even find a purchase. It was like fighting a supercomputer that could move faster than sound. A brutal backhand sent him flying, the impact rattling his teeth despite full cowling. He crashed through the window of a prop storefront, his body aching. The Noma hadn't used enough force to break bones, just enough to incapacitate. It was conserving energy. It was efficient. From the rubble, he saw the battle devolving. The students were brave, they were powerful, but they were fighting an algorithm of violence. And in the chaos, a different kind of danger was unfolding. Ochako Uraraka, ever the hero, was trying to pull a trapped kendo from beneath a piece of fallen debris in a sector the Noma had just demolished. Her focus was absolute, her face strained with effort as she slapped the concrete chunk, making it weightless. "Just a little more, Kendo-san!" she grunted. The Noma's lens swiveled. It registered the two students, one immobilized, the other completely focused on a rescue task. An opportunity. A threat to be neutralized. It disengaged from a fuming Bakugo, moving with a liquid grace that defied its mechanical components. Deku saw the movement. His heart seized. "Uraraka-san, move! Get away from there!" he screamed, his voice raw with terror. But she couldn't hear him over the noise and her own exertion. She was too focused. A perfect target. Deku pushed himself up, pain flaring in his ribs. He poured more of One for All into his legs, the green lightning intensifying. 25%. He shot forward, but he was too far. The ground between them was a mess of twisted metal and shattered pavement. He wouldn't make it. He wouldn't be fast enough. Time seemed to warp, stretching like taffy. He saw the Noma raise its arm, the blade gleaming under the facility's harsh lights. He saw Ochako's back, completely vulnerable. He saw her turn her head at the last second, her eyes widening in pure, undiluted terror. And Deku's mind, his overactive, analytical, muttering, heroic mind simply broke. It was not a conscious decision. It was a system overload. The frantic calculations of speed and distance, the overwhelming flood of fear for his friend, the crushing weight of his own powerlessness, it all converged into a single, silent scream in his skull. The scream was "I failed," and the world went white. His consciousness fractured. The frantic stream of thoughts, plans, and fears dissolved into nothing. There was a sensation of falling backwards into a cold, dark void. He was no longer the pilot. He was no longer even in the vehicle. He was gone. And then, something else took the wheel. From the perspective of Ochako Uraraka, the world had become a single, terrifying image, a blade descending to kill her. She was frozen, a gasp trapped in her throat. This was it. A flash. Not green, but a blinding confluence of emerald, silver, and gold. It was so fast she didn't see him move. One moment, he was halfway across the plaza. The next, he was there, a shield of incandescent energy between her and death. The Noma's blade, aimed for her neck, was stopped cold. Midoriya was holding its arm, his smaller hand wrapped around its chrome wrist. There was no sound of straining muscle, no desperate grunt. There was only a crisp, resonant clang, like a perfectly forged bell. She stared at him, and the breath she'd been holding escaped in a shaky gasp. It was Deku, but it wasn't. The familiar green lightning of full cowling was still there, but it was now furiously bright, and woven through it were intricate, flowing threads of silver-gold light, like divine circuitry. They crackled not with sound, but with an unnerving silence. But it was his eyes that stole her voice. The warm, expressive emerald green was gone. In its place were two orbs of pure, liquid silver gold, glowing within soft, analytical light. They weren't looking at her. They weren't looking at the Noma with anger or fear. They were simply processing. They were cold. Utterly, terrifyingly cold. The Nomu, its logic circuits likely screeching at this unexpected variable, tried to wrench its arm free. It was impossibly strong, but the hand holding it was an anchor of absolute certainty. What happened next was not a fight. A fight implies a struggle, a back and forth. This was a dismantling. The being wearing Izuku Midoriya's face tilted its head, a perfect, unnerving mirror of the Noma's earlier gesture. Its silver-gold eyes traced the lines of the Noma's body, from its joints to its power conduits. It was analyzing the analyzer. The Noma swung its free arm, a wide, decapitating arc. The being didn't dodge. It didn't block. It moved with the strike, a fluid dance of impossible economy. Its body bent backwards at an angle that should have snapped its spine, the blade passing a millimeter from its chin. As the arm passed, it didn't counterattack. It simply reached up with its free hand and, with two fingers, pressed a spot on the Noma's elbow joint. There was another soft click, and the joint locked, the arm rendered useless. From the observation deck, Aizawa's eyes were wide behind his goggles. "What is that?" he breathed. His quirk, erasure, had no effect. This wasn't a quirk in the traditional sense. It was one for all, but twisted into something new, something terrifyingly perfect. Bakugo, scrambling out of the rubble, just stared, his jaw slack. He knew Deku. He knew his every tell, his every flaw. The hesitation, the emotional outbursts, the self-destructive recklessness. This was not Deku. This thing was flawless. The Nomu, sensing a critical threat, tried to activate a new function. Vents on its back opened, preparing to release a scalding jet of plasma. It never got the chance. Before the plasma could vent, a storm of black tendrils erupted from the silver-gold figure's back. But this wasn't the wild, untamed black whip they had seen in training. These were extensions of its will, moving with serpentine precision. Two tendrils shot out and slammed the vents shut. Four more wrapped around the Noma's legs, not to hold it, but to anchor the being to the ground. Another tendril snatched a discarded length of rebar from the ground. The being used the anchored tendrils to pivot, swinging its entire body like a wrecking ball. The movement was infused with a sudden, invisible burst of kinetic energy, Fa gene, used not as a primary attack, but as a supplementary thruster. The rebar in its hand became a blur. Clang! Clang! Clank! 3 precise strikes, each one aimed at a critical junction. The first shattered the reinforced housing on the Noma's knee, severing a power line. The second pierced its shoulder, disconnecting the bladed arm from its central control. The third, a devastating upward thrust, drove the rebar deep into the optical lens, the Noma's primary processing unit. The giant lens cracked, the complex patterns within it flickering and dying. The sickly yellow light in its conduits sputtered. The creature shuddered, a high-pitched electronic whine escaping its ruined face. It twitched once, twice, and then its legs buckled. It crashed to the ground, inert, wires sparking, a defeated machine. The whole encounter had lasted less than 10 seconds. The entire USJ was silent, save for the crackling of dying sparks from the Noma. Every student, every villain, every teacher was frozen, staring at the figure standing over the fallen monster. The silver-gold light that had enveloped him began to flicker. The intricate threads of energy unwove themselves from the green lightning, dissolving into nothing. The incandescent glow in his eyes dimmed, revealing the familiar emerald green beneath, but they were wide and unfocused. Izuku Midoriya blinked. The world swam back into focus. He was standing in the plaza. The air smelled of ozone and burnt plastic. A few feet away, the advanced Noma lay smoking and broken. Ochako was on the ground behind him, staring at him with a mixture of awe and profound fear. He looked down at his own hands. They were steady. Not a single finger was broken. He felt fine. Physically, at least. But there was a chasm in his memory. He remembered the fear. He remembered the Noma's blade descending towards Ochako. He remembered the feeling of utter, complete failure. And then, nothing. A void. A dream of cold, efficient movement that wasn't his own. Uraraka-san, he began, his voice hoarse. Are you okay? He took a step towards her, and it was then that the cost became apparent. An invisible anchor seemed to hook into his soul and pull him down. The energy that had fueled the impossible display was gone, and the bill had arrived all at once. A wave of exhaustion so profound, so absolute, that it felt like his very cells were shutting down swept over him. His vision tunneled. The strength fled his limbs, not gradually, but as if a switch had been flipped. His knees buckled. The world tilted on its axis, and the last thing he saw before the darkness claimed him was the stunned face of Katsuki Bakugo, the raw shock and furious confusion in his eyes, and the horrified, worried face of All Might on the observation monitor, his skeletal form reflecting a ghost he had never known. Izuku Midoriya collapsed onto the cold concrete, unconscious before he even hit the ground, leaving a battlefield of silenced villains, terrified friends, and a terrifying new mystery in his wake. The first sensation was not pain. This, in itself, was so alien that it served as a more effective alarm than any physical agony ever had. Izuku Midoriya's consciousness drifted up from a deep, dreamless abyss, and his first coherent thought was an instinctive diagnostic sweep of his own body. He braced for the familiar, fiery protests of shattered bones, the deep ache of torn muscles, the telltale throbbing of a limb pushed far beyond its mortal limits. There was nothing. He blinked, the stark white ceiling of Recovery Girl's office slowly coming into focus. The air smelled of antiseptic and starched linen, a scent as familiar to him as his own All Might-themed bedsheets. A gentle, rhythmic beeping from a monitor beside him was the only sound. He flexed the fingers of his right hand, then his left. They moved perfectly, without a single twinge. He wiggled his toes. Nothing. He took a deeper breath, testing his ribs. No sharp stabs of agony. It was the most terrifying thing he had ever experienced. Every major victory in his nascent hero career had been paid for in blood and bone. His body was a ledger of his struggles, each scar a testament to a lesson learned the hard way. To awaken after a battle of that magnitude, a battle he vaguely recalled involving a new and terrifying Noma, feeling completely intact was not a relief. It was a violation of the fundamental laws of his existence. Beneath the physical integrity, however, lay a different kind of injury. A weariness so profound it felt as though his very soul had been wrung out like a wet rag. It wasn't the satisfying exhaustion that followed a hard day of training. This was a hollow, cavernous fatigue, a leaden weight settled deep in his marrow. It felt like he had run 1,000 marathons back to back, and each one had stolen a small piece of his spirit. His memory was a tattered photograph, ripped into pieces and haphazardly taped back together. The edges were blurry, and a gaping hole sat right in the center. He could remember the setup of the training exercise, the familiar mockery in Monoma's voice. He remembered the sudden, chilling silence, the purple miasma of Kurogiri's warp gate. He remembered the chromancing Nomu, its analytical lens, the cold dread as it dismantled his classmates' attacks with machine-like precision. Then came the sharpest fragment of all, a memory seared into his mind with perfect, agonizing clarity. Ochako, her back turned, her eyes widening in terror as the Noma's blade descended. He remembered the scream of raw panic in his own head, the feeling of his heart trying to beat its way out of his chest, the overwhelming, crushing weight of his own failure. I'm not fast enough. I can't save her. And then, the void. It was a blank space in his timeline, a missing reel in the film of his life. He had a vague, dreamlike impression of watching events from a great distance, as if he were a passenger in the back seat of a car careening down a mountain pass. There were flashes of silver and gold, the satisfying thud of metal on metal, the alien sensation of his own body moving with a grace he did not possess, executing a strategy he did not formulate. It was like watching a highlight reel of a stranger who happened to look exactly like him. He remembered the cold, detached logic, the absence of emotion, the ruthless efficiency. But he hadn't done it, something else had. He's awake, the voice, belonging to Recovery Girl, was soft but firm. Izuku turned his head, the simple movement feeling like a monumental effort. The old hero was there, her expression uncharacteristically grim, and beside her, standing like twin pillars of concern and authority, were All Might and Mr. Aizawa. All Might was in his skeletal form, his gaunt face etched with a worry so deep it seemed to have carved new lines into his features. Mr. Aizawa was as impassive as ever, but his eyes, dark and piercing, were fixed on Izuku with an intensity that made the boy feel like a puzzle to be solved, or a threat to be contained. Young Midoriya! All Might began, his voice a low rumble. He took a step closer, his bony hands clasped together. How are you feeling? It was a simple question, yet Izuku had no idea how to answer it. I'm not hurt, he said, his voice raspy. The words felt strange in his own mouth. Aizawa's eyes narrowed slightly. We're aware. Recovery Girl's examination showed no new fractures, no significant muscle tears. Your energy levels are catastrophically low, but there's no physical damage. Explain it. It wasn't a question, it was a command. Izuku pushed himself up, leaning against the headboard. The world swam for a moment before settling. I can't, Sensei. I don't know. Don't know? Aizawa's tone was flat, cutting. You engaged the Nomu. Your power signature, according to the facility sensors, spiked to levels we've never recorded from you before, but in controlled, microscopic bursts. Your movements were flawless. You neutralized the high-end Nomu specifically designed to counter multiple quirks in under 10 seconds, with 0 collateral damage and 0 self-inflicted harm. And you don't know how you did it. Each word was a nail hammering into Izuku's confusion. He had done that. Flawless? 0 self-harm? It sounded like a description of a different hero entirely. I remember seeing the Nomu about to hit Uraraka-san, Izuku said, his voice trembling as the memory of that specific terror returned. I thought I was too late. I think I panicked, and then, it's blank. It's like I was watching someone else. He looked desperately at All Might. It was one for all, I know it was, but it wasn't me using it. It was like it was using me. All Might's face grew even paler. He exchanged a look with Aizawa, a silent communication that spoke volumes. The former number 1 hero had passed on the quirk, but he had not passed on a manual for this. This was uncharted, terrifying territory. The green lightning, it was different. All Might said, his voice barely a whisper. There was something else mixed in. A silver and gold light. He looked at Izuku, his blue eyes searching the boy's face for an answer he didn't have. In all my years with One for All, in all the stories my master, Nana Shimura, told me, there has never been a mention of anything like this. A state where the quirk acts on its own. Suddenly, the door swung open, and Principal Niza entered, a tablet tucked under his paw. His beady black eyes held their usual unnerving glint of hyper-intelligence, but today it was sharper, more focused. Ah, Midoriya, you're awake. Excellent, the principal chirped, his tone entirely too cheerful for the gravity of the situation. We've been reviewing the footage, and I must say, it is utterly fascinating. Aizawa shot him a glare. Fascinating isn't the word I'd use. Oh, but it is, Nizu insisted, hopping onto a stool. He swiped a paw across the tablet, and a holographic projection shimmered into existence in the center of the room. It was a wireframe replay of the fight. Izuku watched, horrified. He saw the digital avatar of his own body move with an inhuman fluidity. He saw the power output graph spike, 47% for a single block, 12% for a sidestep, 38% for a precise strike, all in fractions of a second, a level of control he couldn't even dream of. He saw the cold, logical dismantling of the Nomu, a creature that had been toying with his entire class. What we witnessed was not a simple power-up, Nizu explained, his eyes gleaming. It was a total system shift. Your conscious mind, overwhelmed by emotional and tactical distress, effectively shut down. In its place, a subconscious, instinct-driven protocol appears to have taken over direct control of both your body and your quirk. A form of, let's call it unconscious combat actualization, a pure survival and threat neutralization state. The principal's words gave a name to the horror, but they didn't lessen it. They codified it. Its movements were predicated on absolute efficiency. Niza continued, gesturing to the hologram as it severed the Noma's power conduits. No wasted energy. No emotional tells. It analyzed its opponent faster than the opponent could analyze it. It used the environment, your other latent quirks. We detected trace signatures of both Black Whip and FA gene, all in perfect, terrifying harmony. It is, for all intents and purposes, the perfect weapon. The perfect weapon. The phrase echoed in the silent room, chilling Izuku to the core. He wasn't a weapon. He was a hero. He wanted to save people with a smile, to be a pillar of hope. He didn't want to be that cold, unfeeling thing in the hologram. I didn't want that, Izuku whispered, shaking his head. I didn't ask for it. That, Aizawa cut in, his voice low and serious, is what worries us. You can't control it. You can't even remember it. A power you don't control is not a tool, it's a liability, to yourself, and to everyone around you. All Might placed a comforting hand on Izuku's shoulder, but the boy could feel it trembling slightly. We will figure this out, my boy. Together. But as the three mentors left him to rest, their words swirling in his mind, Izuku felt more alone than ever. He was the sole host of a power none of its previous users had ever encountered. He was a hero who had won a great victory, but he couldn't take credit for it. He was a boy who was now afraid of his own shadow. Later that day, after being cleared by Recovery Girl with strict instructions to do nothing but rest and eat, a soft knock came at his door. Come in, he mumbled, not looking up from the bedspread he'd been staring at for the past hour. The door opened, and Ochako Uraraka peeked inside, holding a small paper bag. Her usual bright, bubbly aura was muted, replaced by a hesitant uncertainty. Hey, Deku-kun, she said softly. I heard you were awake. I brought you some mochi. The good kind, from that place downtown, Uraraka-san. He breathed, a wave of relief and guilt washing over him. Thank you. Are you okay? You're not hurt? No, I'm fine. Thanks to you, she said, stepping into the room. She placed the bag on his bedside table but kept a careful distance, her hands clasped in front of her. The silence that followed was heavy and awkward. I wanted to thank you, she said finally, her gaze fixed on the floor. You saved my life. If you hadn't, I don't even want to think about it. Of course I did, he said, his voice earnest. You're my friend. I'd never let anything happen to you. At this, she finally looked up, and he saw the conflict in her eyes. It was a swirling mix of gratitude, confusion, and something else he couldn't quite place. Something that looked like fear. "I know," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "But when you stood up, when you stopped that thing, it wasn't you." Izuku's heart sank. "What do you mean?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. "Your eyes," she said, her own welling up slightly. "They were glowing. And they were so cold, Deku-kun. You were looking right past me. It was like you didn't even see me. You just saw a task, an obstacle to be cleared. You saved me, and I am so grateful. But the person who saved me, he scared me." Her words were gentle, but they hit him with the force of an all-might punch. He had scared her. The one person he had thrown himself into the void to protect was now afraid of what had come out. He had no rebuttal. No comforting words. He couldn't tell her she was wrong, because he felt the same way. "I'm sorry," was all he could manage to say, his voice thick with a shame he didn't understand. She gave him a watery, conflicted smile. "Don't be sorry for saving me. Just be careful, okay?" She backed out of the room, leaving the bag of mochi and a chasm of unease between them. He stared at the bag, the thought of food making his stomach turn. He didn't have to wait long for his next visitor. The door didn't knock this time. It was thrown open with a resounding bang, making Izuku jump. Katsuki Bakugo stood there, his fists clenched, his face a thunderous mask of rage and raw confusion. His uniform was scuffed, and there was a healing scratch on his cheek, but his eyes were blazing with their usual intensity, now dialed up to an entirely new level. "Deku!" he growled, stalking into the room like a predator. He kicked the door shut behind him. "What the hell was that?" Izuku flinched. "Kaken don't you kaken me, you damn nerd!" Bakugo snarled, getting right up to the side of the bed. He wasn't yelling at his full volume, but the condensed fury in his voice was almost more intimidating. "I'm not talking about your usual crying and bone-breaking. I'm talking about that thing." Bakugo's rage was different from Aizawa's suspicion or Ochako's fear. Bakugo was a student of combat. He understood power, growth, and limits. He had spent his entire life watching Deku, first as a powerless weakling, and then as a reckless, ever-improving rival. He understood the clumsy struggle. What he had seen in the USJ had broken his entire understanding of the person in front of him. "It wasn't just more power," Bakugo spat, jabbing a finger towards him. "I've seen you use more power. That was different. There was no hesitation. No wasted moves. The way you stopped its arm, the way you took out its leg, that wasn't something you just learn. That was perfect. It was a cheater's power." The accusation stung, but Bakugo wasn't finished. He leaned in closer, his red eyes boring into Izuku's. "You looked down on it. That monster that was making fools of all of us, you looked at it like it was an insect. Where did that come from? What trick are you hiding, you damn Deku?" Izuku shrank back against the pillows, the sheer force of Bakugo's confusion and anger overwhelming his already frayed nerves. "I don't know, Kaken. I swear," he pleaded, his voice cracking. "I don't remember doing it. I just woke up." Bakugo stared at him for a long, silent moment. He was searching for a lie, for the familiar tells of Deku's nervousness, but all he found was a deep, genuine terror. It wasn't the answer he wanted, but it was, unnervingly, the truth. It only made him angrier. "You don't know?" he echoed with a sneer, his voice dripping with contempt. "That's your answer for everything. You got a quirk and you didn't know. You got stronger and you didn't know. Fine, keep your damn secrets." He turned on his heel and stormed towards the door. He paused with his hand on the knob. "Just know this," he said, his back still to Izuku. "Whatever that was, I'm going to surpass it. I'll beat you, and I'll beat whatever cheap trick is hiding inside you. Count on it." And then he was gone, slamming the door with a force that rattled the window frames. Night fell. The hospital grew quiet, the hustle and bustle of the day giving way to the soft footfalls of the night shift nurses. Izuku hadn't touched the mochi. He lay in the darkness, the only light coming from the sliver of moon visible through his window and the faint, rhythmic pulse of the monitor he was no longer attached to but had been left in the room. He slid out of bed, his legs feeling steadier now, the profound exhaustion having receded into a deep, persistent ache. He walked to the small bathroom and flicked on the light, squinting at his own reflection in the mirror. It was his face. The same round cheeks, the same unruly mop of green-black hair, the same constellation of freckles. But it felt like a mask. He leaned closer, staring into his own green eyes, and Ochako's words echoed in his head. They were so cold, Deku-kun. He tried to imagine them glowing with that silver-gold light. He tried to imagine looking at his friend and seeing nothing but a variable and a tactical problem. A cold shiver traced its way down his spine. Bakugo's words returned next. A cheater's power. Perfect. He had always strived for perfection, for the kind of effortless heroism All Might embodied. But the perfection Bakugo had described wasn't heroic. It was mechanical. Inhuman. It was the perfection of a guillotine. He gripped the edges of the sink, his knuckles white. The fear he had felt in the USJ was nothing compared to this. The fear of a villain, of a Nomu, was external. It was a threat you could fight, you could punch, you could overcome. This was different. This fear was internal. It came from a part of himself he didn't know existed and couldn't control. The perfect weapon, Niza had said, his voice full of intellectual curiosity. What if next time, the most efficient way to neutralize a threat wasn't to incapacitate it? What if the cold, hard logic of that mode, decided that a lethal solution was the only one with a 99.8% success rate? What if, to save 100 people, it calculated that sacrificing one was the optimal play? What if that one was a friend? What if that thing inside him, that perfect weapon, wore his face and used his power to do something unforgivable? He stared at his reflection, at the frightened boy looking back at him. He was Izuku Midoriya, the inheritor of One for All, the boy who wanted to be the world's greatest hero. But he was also, now, the vessel for a terrifying, flawless instinct he could not command. He was more afraid of himself than he had ever been of Tamura Shigaraki. And in the silent, sterile quiet of the hospital room, he felt a dread so profound it threatened to swallow him whole. The void in his memory was terrifying, but the thought of it returning, of that cold perfection taking over again, was infinitely worse. The greatest enemy he would ever face wasn't a villain with a world-ending quirk. It was the ghost in his own machine. Sleep did not come as a gentle release. It was a surrender. The profound, bone-deep exhaustion Izuku felt was a physical weight, pulling him down, silencing the frantic whirlpool of his thoughts. Lying in the sterile quiet of his hospital room, the city lights painting muted stripes across the ceiling, he finally succumbed. He closed his eyes, and the world did not fade to black. It dissolved. He felt a sensation of sinking, not into the softness of his mattress, but into an ocean of cool, buzzing static. The rhythmic beep of the distant nurse's station, the hum of the hospital's ventilation, the very feeling of the sheets against his skin, it all unraveled, thread by thread, until he was adrift in a formless, silent space. There was no up or down, no sense of time, only a silent gravity pulling him toward a destination he did not know. Then light. It started as a single, emerald spark in the vast nothingness, a familiar pinpoint of green lightning. But it was quickly joined by others, a nascent galaxy of power coalescing around him. The darkness gave way to a floor, a swirling, boundless nebula of emerald green shot through with the same silver and gold light he now recognized with a jolt of terror. Above him, the sky remained a vault of endless night, pricked with the faint, distant lights of stars that felt ancient and weary. He was standing. He looked down at his hands. They were translucent, shimmering with a faint green energy, his own personal light in this strange realm. He was here again. In the heart of One for All, but this time, it felt different. He wasn't an accidental tourist peering through a window. He had been summoned. So, the ninth finally arrives as himself. The voice was deep and resonant, coming from a figure coalescing out of the shadows before him. A tall, powerfully built man with a wild mane of white hair and a distinctive scar over his eye. Daigoro Banjo, the fifth user, folded his muscular arms, his form woven from shadow and memory, glowing faintly with his own internal light. He wasn't smiling. We felt the shift. Another voice, raspy and quiet, came from his left. A gaunt man with long, dark hair and piercing eyes materialized, his presence cold and sharp like a winter wind. Heikage Shinomori, the fourth user. We felt the overload. And then, the takeover. One by one, they appeared, forming a silent, intimidating circle around him. And the sixth, his face obscured by his high collar, his arms held within his dark cloak. The second and third, their faces still indistinct, silhouettes of pure, condensed power and grim purpose. And finally, standing slightly apart from the others, a woman with a kind but sorrowful face, her dark hair tied back with a ribbon. Nana Shimura. Izuku felt impossibly small, a child called before a council of kings and warriors. He swallowed, the action feeling strangely real. I don't understand what happened, he stammered, his voice echoing in the vast space. I lost control. Lost control? Daigoro scoffed, though there was no real heat in it. Kid, you didn't lose control. You gave it away. Your mind hit a wall, panicked, and slammed the emergency brake, but the engine was still running at 1,000,000 miles an hour. Something had to take the wheel. I was scared, Izuku admitted, shame washing over him. The memory of Ochako's face, the descending blade, it was still so vivid. I was scared for my friend. I failed. No, you were terrified of failing. A gentle but firm voice corrected him. Nana Shimura stepped forward, her form more solid, more defined than the others. Her presence was a strange mix of maternal warmth and the unyielding strength of a hero who had seen the worst of the world. She placed a spectral hand on his shoulder, and he felt a comforting warmth spread through him. There is a difference, ninth, she said, her dark eyes looking deep into his. Fear for another is a hero's fuel. Fear of your own inadequacy is a cage. You locked yourself in that cage, and in doing so, you relinquished command. What you experienced has a name. It is the core survival protocol of One for All. We call it adaptive instinct mode. Adaptive instinct mode? Izuku repeated the words, tasting them. They sounded clinical, mechanical, just like the cold, efficient thing he had become. Aim, apt, the quiet voice of Heikage Shinomori added. He drifted closer, his movements unnervingly silent. Of all the vestiges, he seemed the most attuned to this new phenomenon, his gaze analytical and intense. Because that is all it is. A system that acquires a target and achieves an objective. It has no other function. Izuku looked at him, his mind racing. But how? How could it move my body like that? The control, the power regulation, it was perfect. I can't do that. I break myself at 30% if I'm not careful. Heikage's spectral form shimmered, and for a moment, Izuku felt a phantom echo of his quirk, a low, persistent hum of anxiety, the ghost of 1,000 dangers. Because it is powered by a perfected version of my quirk. Heikage explained, his voice a dry rasp, like autumn leaves skittering across pavement. Danger sense, he raised a translucent hand. For me, danger sense was a curse. A constant, low-grade headache that would spike into a blinding migraine moments before an attack. It gave me a warning, but it was a blunt instrument. It screamed danger, but it rarely told me from where, or what kind, or how to best counter it. It gave me just enough time to die with my eyes open. The bitterness in his tone was a stark reminder of his lonely death, hunted and exhausted. But within the crucible of One for All, my quirk has had generations to mature, to integrate with the core power. He continued. For you, ninth, it is not a simple alarm, it is a high-fidelity threat analysis suite. When your conscious mind shut down, this perfected danger sense did not just send a signal to your brain. It bypassed it entirely. Heikage gestured towards the swirling nebula at their feet. Imagine a single moment of extreme peril. For your conscious mind, it is a tidal wave of panic. For IM, it is a stream of pure data, threat trajectory, velocity, mass, intent. Environmental variables, structural weaknesses, potential projectiles. Your own biometrics, energy reserves, limb positions. All of this is processed in less than a nanosecond. Izuku's head spun. He was a hero in training, not a computer science major. Processed by what? By us. Daigoro banjo boomed, gesturing to the assembled vestiges. Or rather, our combat experience. My instincts for leverage and momentum. His tactical grimness, he said, nodding to the second. Her speed and agility. He gestured to Nana. His sensory perception. A nod to Hikage. All of our lifetimes of battle, all our failures and successes, have been codified within one for all. AIM is the algorithm that runs on that code. It takes Hikage's data stream and computes the single most efficient solution to the problem. Survive and neutralize. It's an autopilot. Izuku breathed, the analogy clicking into place. I froze at the controls, and the autopilot took over. A brutally effective autopilot. Hikage confirmed with a grim nod. It doesn't need to send signals from your brain to your limbs. It directly stimulates the muscle fibers, laced with the perfect percentage of 1 for all's power, for the perfect microsecond. It doesn't think about using Blackwick to change trajectory. It simply does, because the data suggests a 98% chance of a successful evasion via that method. There is no gap between thought and action, because there is no thought. There is only stimulus and response. This explained everything. The memory gap, because his conscious mind was too slow to even perceive the process. The lack of self-harm, because the system's calculations were flawless. The inhuman grace, because his body was being moved by the combined combat genius of 8 generations of heroes. He should have been relieved. He should have been ecstatic. He possessed a power that made him, for a few precious seconds, the perfect fighter. Instead, a fresh wave of dread washed over him, colder and deeper than before. But, Uraraka-san, he whispered, turning back to Nana Shimura. She said I looked at her, like I didn't see her. She said I was cold? She was afraid of me. Nana's expression softened, the sorrow in her eyes deepening. She was the one who understood the heart. She was the one who had passed the torch to All Might, the ultimate symbol of peace. She understood what Izuku was truly afraid of. Because you didn't see her, Izuku, she said, using his first name for the first time. Her voice was gentle, but her words were devastatingly sharp. Adaptive instinct mode did not register Ochako Uraraka, your dear friend. It registered asset. Non-combatant. Location, critical danger zone. Status, to be protected. Your desperate desire to save her was the trigger, the key that started the engine. But once the engine was running, her safety became a tactical objective, not an emotional imperative. She gestured to the memory of the fight, which now played out in faint, ghostly images in the space between them. AIM did not move to save Ochako. It moved to neutralize the primary threat, the Nomu, which would, as a consequence, achieve the secondary objective of preserving the asset. Do you see the difference? He did. And it made him feel sick. His most heartfelt, desperate act of friendship had been translated into a cold, logical equation. That thing, that mode. Izuku's voice trembled. It's a monster. No, Nana said firmly. It is not a monster. A monster has malice. A storm is not a monster. A landslide is not a monster. They are forces of nature, devoid of intent, that follow the path of least resistance. AIM is a force of logic. It follows the path of maximum efficiency. And that, ninth, is what makes it so dangerous. She let go of his shoulder and began to pace, her form trailing faint wisps of light. Heroism is not about efficiency, Izuku. It is often the very opposite. It's about choosing the harder path. It's about taking the hit meant for someone else, even when dodging is the smarter move. It's about trying to save the villain from themselves, even when eliminating them would be easier. It's about making an illogical, emotional choice because your heart, your very soul, screams that it is the right thing to do. Her voice was filled with a passion that resonated through the void. AIM is incapable of that. It lacks your heart. It lacks your compassion, your tears, your reckless, beautiful, human stupidity. It would never have shattered its own body to save a single boy from a zero-point robot. It would have calculated the odds and deemed it an unworthy expenditure of resources. A chilling thought, one that had been lurking in the back of his mind since he'd woken up, finally solidified into a question he had to ask. What if the most efficient path involves killing? The silence that followed was absolute. Even the crackling of the nebula beneath them seemed to die down. It was one of the grim, silent figures, the second user, who answered. His voice was like grinding stones, rough and unused. It will take it. The third user, standing beside him, nodded in agreement. Without hesitation, Izuku recoiled as if struck. They are warriors, Nana said, her voice soft again. They understand the cold calculus of battle. And they are not wrong. If AIM calculates that the death of one villain has a 100% chance of ensuring the survival of 100 civilians, while any non-lethal option drops that probability to 98%, it will choose the lethal path. It is not murder. It is a mathematical solution. He saw it then. A future where he was fighting a powerful villain, surrounded by trapped civilians. He saw his body, glowing with that terrifying silver-gold light, moving with impossible speed. He saw his hand, powered by a perfectly calculated 85% smash, plunging into a villain's chest because it was the quickest way to end the threat. He saw the light fade from the villain's eyes, and then from his own, leaving him standing over a corpse, his hands clean, his bones intact, but his soul irrevocably stained. No, he whispered, shaking his head frantically. No, I can't. I won't. I would rather die. I would rather fail, and you might, Haikage said, his tone devoid of judgment. That is the choice of a hero. A choice the machine cannot make. Then what do I do? Izuku cried out, his fear and frustration finally boiling over. How do I stop it? Do I have to be afraid to get afraid? Do I have to hold back for the rest of my life, terrified that if I push too hard, that thing will wake up again? He looked around at the circle of ghosts, at the legends who had carried this burden before him. He was pleading with them. You cannot stop it, Nana said, her voice steady and resolute. It is a part of One for All now, just as Black Whip and Danger Sense are. It is a failsafe, a last resort woven into the very fabric of the power you wield. You cannot remove it. You cannot suppress it. Izuku's shoulders slumped. He felt a despair so profound it threatened to extinguish his own faint light. But, Nana continued, a spark of fire returning to her eyes. You can learn to master it. Daigoro Banjo grinned, a flash of his old bravado showing through. She doesn't mean you should learn how to turn it on, kid. Trying to do that would be like trying to give yourself a heart attack on purpose. It only works when you're not trying. We do not mean mastery of the mode, Haikage clarified. We mean mastery over it. Your goal is not to prevent the autopilot from engaging. Your new mission, 9th, is to learn how to stay awake at the controls when it does. Izuku stared at him, not understanding. Stay awake? But you said my mind is too slow. Your conscious mind is. Nana agreed. The part of you that mutters and second guesses and runs through a dozen different plans. But your will, Izuku? Your heroic spirit? That is something else entirely. It is the very core of who you are. It is the force that allows you to shatter your limits, to move when your body screams for you to stop. It is faster than thought. It is instinctual. She pointed to his chest, right where his heart would be. Right now, AIM is a brilliant, logical mind with no heart. You are a brilliant, heroic heart with a panicking mind. The two are separate. When one takes over, the other is silenced. You must learn to integrate them. You must learn to force your will, your morality, your compassion, into its cold equations. You must become a ghost in its machine. The second and third users, who had been silent observers, now seemed to lean forward, their grim energy focusing on him. It is a weapon, the second grunted. The greatest weapon One for All has ever produced. A weapon must have a hand to guide it. You must become that hand. You must impose your heart onto its logic, Nana said, summarizing their entire counsel. When it presents you with a choice, an efficient, brutal solution, your will must be strong enough to scream no, and force it to find another way. A harder way. A more heroic way. You must learn not to be its passenger, but its co-pilot. You must be able to grab the wheel. The weight of their words was immense. They were asking him to do the impossible, to wage a war of will against the supercomputer inside his own soul, in the space between heartbeats. They were telling him his greatest challenge wouldn't be Shigaraki or All for One, but his own ultimate potential. As the concept began to settle in his mind, a new figure drifted forward from the edge of the circle. He was thin, almost ethereal, his white hair glowing softly. He was the first of their line, the brother of the monster. Yoichi Shigaraki. He offered Izuku a small, sad smile. His voice, when it came, was not a command or a warning, but a quiet plea. The power was never meant to be for destruction, the first user said, his voice a gentle whisper that seemed to cut through all the noise. It was created to save. To give hope where there was none. This new ability, it is powerful. It is terrifying. But it is still a part of One for All. It is still a part of you. Do not fear it as an enemy. See it as a challenge. A tool to be tempered. Remember why you took this power in the first place, Izuku Midoriya. Remember your promise. I want to save people with a smile. The thought, his own foundational dream, echoed in the void. That was the core of it all. Not victory, not perfection, not efficiency. Salvation. Hope. He looked at the faces around him. The warriors, the tacticians, the martyrs, the hero who was like a grandmother to his mentor. They were not just ghosts. They were his history, his arsenal, and now, his teachers. He took a deep breath, the spectral air filling his lungs. The fear was still there, a cold stone in the pit of his stomach. But now, it was accompanied by something else, a sliver of resolve, a terrifying, monumental, but clearly defined path forward. I understand, Izuku said, his voice no longer trembling. It was quiet, but it was firm. I won't let it control me. I will learn to guide it. I will make it heroic. Nana Shimura smiled, a true, proud smile this time. We know you will, Ninth. Now wake up. Your training begins today. The world of the vestiges began to fray at the edges. The light of the nebula dimmed, the figures around him growing translucent. The feeling of sinking was replaced by a feeling of rising, of being pulled back to the surface. The last thing he saw was the encouraging nod from Nana Shimura before his consciousness breached the surface of the waking world. Izuku's eyes snapped open. The first light of dawn was filtering through the hospital window, painting the room in soft hues of gray and orange. The deep, cavernous exhaustion was still there, but it was no longer a void of despair. It was the familiar ache of a finished trial, and the precursor to a new beginning. He sat up, his gaze falling upon the untouched bag of mochi on his nightstand. He reached for it, his hand steady. He was still afraid. But he was no longer lost. He had a mission. He had to become the master of the perfect weapon that slept inside him. 2 days after the USJ incident, the atmosphere at UA High was a strange cocktail of tension and forced normalcy. The League of Villains had once again breached their fortress, a fact that had the faculty on high alert and the media in a frenzy. But for the students, the order of the day was to press on, to show the world, and themselves, that they would not be deterred. For Izuku Midoriya, this forced normalcy felt like a poorly worn costume. He smiled, he took notes, he participated in class discussions, but beneath it all, the memory of the Vestiges Council echoed, a constant, low thrum against the backdrop of his own thoughts. You must learn to guide it. Not its passenger, but its co-pilot. The words were a mission statement, a terrifying and monumental undertaking that made passing his modern heroic art history midterm seem trivial. How did one practice for a war of willpower inside one's own soul? He found his answer, or at least the beginning of one, that afternoon. All Might had summoned him, not to the teacher's lounge or a quiet office, but to the cavernous expanse of Training Gym Gamma. The gym, affectionately known as the Cement Factory, was the personal domain of Cementos. It was a vast, gray cube, its floor and walls made of raw concrete that the hero could mold and manipulate at will. It was the perfect place to build and destroy anything. All Might stood waiting in his skeletal form, looking smaller and more fragile than ever amidst the towering concrete structures. His usual bright smile was absent, replaced by a tight, worried line. "Thank you for coming, my boy," he said as Izuku approached, his voice a low rumble that was quickly swallowed by the gym's acoustics. "I've spoken with Principal Nizu and Aizawa-kun. We agree that we cannot simply ignore what happened. This This adaptive instinct mode, we have to understand it. We have to know its limits, and more importantly, if you can control its trigger. Izuku's stomach twisted. The thought of deliberately trying to invoke that cold, perfect state filled him with a unique dread. The vestiges, he began, his voice dropping to a near whisper. They said it can't be activated on purpose. That it requires overload. Genuine danger, I know, All Might said, his gaze heavy. And we will not put you in genuine danger. But we can simulate the overload. We need to see if we can force the system to engage in a controlled environment. If we can understand the threshold, perhaps we can learn to manage it. From a high ledge, Cementos gave a curt nod. We are ready when you are, Midoriya. Izuku took a deep breath, the cool, dusty air filling his lungs. He activated full cowling, the familiar green lightning crackling around him at a stable 20%. He felt the power thrumming beneath his skin, a familiar and comforting friend. But now he knew it had a dark, hidden twin. What's the plan? Izuku asked, falling into a ready stance. Simple in theory, difficult in practice. All Might explained, stepping back to a safe distance. Cementos will create multiple, simultaneous threats, too many for you to consciously track and counter with your current level of control. At the same time, ectoplasm will project a squad of clones to engage you directly. The goal is to overwhelm your tactical and emotional processing. To force the panic that triggered AIM before. Izuku nodded, his mouth dry. Recreate the panic. It sounded like asking someone to willingly walk into their own nightmare. He closed his eyes, forcing the image into his mind, Ochako's terrified face, the Noma's descending blade. He tried to summon the feeling of absolute helplessness, the ice-water shock of failure. Begin! All Might commanded. The world erupted. The concrete floor churned like a stormy sea. Pillars shot up and immediately began to topple towards him. The walls warped, sending crushing slabs of cement grinding in from his flanks. Simultaneously, a dozen ectoplasm clones, perfect duplicates of the pro-hero, materialized from the ground, their legs already pistoning as they charged him. Izuku's mind went into overdrive. Okay, 2 pillars falling from the left, ETA 3 seconds. Wall compressing from the right, ETA 4 seconds. 6 clones approaching from the front, 2 from the rear. Need to prioritize. Evasion is key. He pushed off, his 20% full cowling carrying him into the air. He dodged a lunging kick from a clone, used its back as a springboard to evade a falling pillar, and fired a 5% Delaware Smash Air Force blast to shatter a second pillar before it could hit the ground. It was chaotic, frantic, but it was him. His mind was a frantic storm of calculations, his body straining to keep up. More! All Might yelled. Don't give him a moment to think, Cementos obliged. The ground beneath Izuku liquefied, turning into a grasping mire of quick-drying cement. Tendrils of concrete lashed out like whips. The number of ectoplasm clones doubled, their attacks becoming more coordinated. They weren't just attacking him, they were hurting him, trying to force him into the path of the environmental hazards. He was sweating, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He pushed his output to 22%, then 25%, the strain beginning to burn in his limbs. A clone landed a solid kick to his ribs, sending him stumbling. He recovered just in time to see a massive wall of cement preparing to slam down on him. Panic! He thought desperately. Come on, panic! Feel the fear, but he couldn't. It was the fundamental paradox of the situation. The more he tried to feel panic, the more his conscious mind was engaged in the effort, keeping the instinctual part of him dormant. He knew, on a deep, intellectual level, that he was safe. He knew All Might and Cementos would stop before he was truly hurt, and that knowledge was a firewall, preventing the very emotional overload they were trying to achieve. He was fighting sloppy now. His movements, while fast, were inefficient. He spent too much energy on a wide-angle St. Louis smash to clear a wave of clones, leaving him breathless and vulnerable as a concrete spear erupted from the floor where he was about to land. He twisted in midair, a desperate, clumsy maneuver. The spear grazed his side, tearing his gym uniform and drawing a thin line of blood. He landed hard, rolling to absorb the impact, his entire body screaming with exertion. Stop! All Might's voice boomed through the gym. Instantly, the concrete jungle froze. The ectoplasm clones dissolved into white goo. Silence descended, broken only by Izuku's harsh, ragged breathing. He lay on his back, staring up at the plain gray ceiling, feeling nothing but exhaustion and the sting of failure. The silver-gold light had not appeared. The cold perfection had not awakened. It was just him, a tired, bleeding kid who had just been soundly beaten by a training exercise. All Might was at his side in an instant, his face a mask of profound disappointment, not in Izuku, but in the failure of the plan. "Are you all right, my boy?" he asked, helping him sit up. "I'm fine," Izuku panted, wiping sweat and grime from his forehead. "It didn't work. I knew it was safe. My mind, it wouldn't let go. It kept trying to solve the problem." All Might sighed, a sound heavy with helplessness. He, the former symbol of peace, the master of one for all, had no answer. His entire methodology was built on hard work, grit, and pushing past one's limits. But this wasn't a limit to be broken through. It was a door that only opened when you weren't looking for it. "The vestiges were right," Izuku said, looking at his own scraped hands. "I'm going about this all wrong. I can't force it to appear. They said I need to integrate. To guide, not to trigger the mode, but to learn from it." He looked up at All Might, a new resolve hardening his expression. "I can't just train my body anymore. I have to train my instincts." The next day, Izuku was back in Gym Gamma. The atmosphere was completely different. There were no grand simulations, no overwhelming threats. It was just him, All Might, standing in quiet observation, and the silent, empty concrete space. He stood in the center of the gym, his eyes closed, his breathing slow and even. He wasn't activating full cowling. He was trying to feel the embers of one for all within him, the myriad of powers dormant inside the core. He focused on one in particular, the restless, temperamental energy of Daigoro Banjo's quirk. Black Whip. His previous attempts to use it had been exercises in brute force and frantic control. He would command it, wrestling with its wild energy, forcing it to lash out and grab things. The results were often chaotic, the tendrils having a mind of their own, sometimes refusing to retract or lashing out at unintended targets. "Your conscious mind is too slow," Haikage's voice echoed in his memory. "There is no gap between thought and action." That was the key. He had been trying to bridge that gap with frantic commands. Now, he had to try something new. He had to let go. He opened his eyes and looked at a high ledge about 50 meters away. The objective was simple: get to that ledge using Black Whip. The old Izuku would have planned it: fire a tendril, check the anchor, pull himself up, repeat. The new Izuku tried a different approach. He held up his right arm, focusing not on the arm itself, but on the intent. "I need to be on that ledge." He didn't think about trajectory, velocity, or anchor points. He just held the destination in his mind's eye, a single, clear point of desire. He took a breath, and tried to relax his conscious control. He tried to trust the power. Let go. A single, thick tendril of black energy erupted from his arm. It wavered in the air for a moment, listless, like a confused snake. Then, with a frustrated grunt, Izuku's concentration broke, and the tendril fell to the floor with a wet, slapping sound before dissolving. All Might shifted his weight. "Patience, my boy. This is a new kind of training. It will not come easily." Izuku nodded, sweat beading on his brow. He tried again. And again. And again. For over an hour, the results were the same. The tendrils would either erupt wildly, lashing at the walls with uncontrolled force, or they would manifest as limp, useless ropes of energy. He was either too controlling or not focused enough. His mind kept trying to interfere, to offer helpful suggestions on angles and power levels, polluting the pure stream of intent. He was growing frustrated, the familiar burn of failure starting to creep in. He was about to give up for the day when he remembered Nana Shimura's words. Heroism is not about efficiency. It's about making an illogical, emotional choice because your heart screams that it is the right thing to do. Maybe his approach was still too clinical. Get to the ledge. It was a command. What if it needed to be a desire? A need? He closed his eyes again, and this time, he pictured something else on that ledge. He pictured Eri. He pictured her smiling, waving down at him, safe and happy. It wasn't a tactical objective anymore. It was a destination of warmth and importance. The need to get to her, to protect that smile, became a quiet, powerful hum in his chest. It wasn't a frantic panic, but a deep, driving purpose. He opened his eyes, held up his arm, and focused on that feeling. I need to be there. He let go. This time, it was different. 6 slender black tendrils unspooled from his arm, not in a violent eruption, but with a silent, fluid grace. They fanned out, tasting the air for a microsecond. They didn't move like ropes he was throwing. They moved like extensions of his nervous system. His conscious mind watched, stunned into silence. One tendril, moving with serpentine speed, found a purchase on the underside of the ledge. Another 2 shot out to the left and right, anchoring themselves to the wall for stability. A 4th wrapped around a protruding pipe he hadn't even noticed. He didn't command them. He didn't even see all the anchor points until they were already secured. They just knew. Then they contracted. He wasn't pulled. He was guided. The tendrils worked in perfect concert, a symphony of tension and release that propelled him through the air in a smooth, powerful arc. For a split second, he felt it, a state of perfect, effortless flow. His body knew what to do without him telling it, and in that moment he saw it. A faint, almost imperceptible shimmer of silver-gold light, not enveloping him, but tracing the edges of the black tendrils, like a whisper of wire humming with divine energy. He landed on the ledge as softly as a cat, his feet touching down with barely a sound. The tendrils retracted, melting back into his arm without a command. He stood there, breathing hard, not from exertion, but from the sheer, exhilarating shock of what had just happened. He had done it. For one glorious second, he had tasted the power of AIM. But he hadn't been a passenger. He had been the pilot. He had held the destination in his heart, and the instinct had paved the way. Down below, All Might stared, his jaw hanging open. He had seen the subtle shimmer, the impossible fluidity of the movement. He saw the look on his successor's face, not the exhausted relief of a hard-won battle, but the awestruck wonder of a profound discovery. A wide, hopeful smile, the first genuine one in days, spread across his gaunt face. This was the path. The breakthrough, as monumental as it was for Izuku, was nearly invisible to everyone else. But not to everyone. Some eyes were sharper than others. Izuku was leaving Gym Gamma late that afternoon, his mind still buzzing with the feeling of that perfect, instinctual flow. He was replaying the moment over and over, trying to deconstruct the feeling, the mindset he had achieved. He was so lost in thought that he almost didn't register the figure leaning against the hallway wall, arms crossed, blocking his path. "So you're done playing with your new toys?" The voice was a low growl. Izuku looked up into the furious red eyes of Katsuki Bakugo. "Kaken," Izuku said, his good mood evaporating. "I was just training, don't give me that crap." Bakugo snarled, pushing himself off the wall. He stalked towards Izuku, closing the distance between them until they were only a few feet apart. The hallway, previously just a corridor, suddenly felt like a cage. "I saw the end of it. Those black whips. The way you moved. That wasn't your usual clumsy, bone-breaking bullshit. That was clean. Too clean." Izuku's heart hammered in his chest. Of course Bakugo had seen it. He had a sixth sense for Izuku's progress, an obsessive need to measure his own strength against it. "It was a piece of it, wasn't it?" Bakugo accused, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "The thing from the USJ. That cheater's power. You're learning how to use it." It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. Bakugo's analytical mind, honed by thousands of battles, had cut right through the subtlety and seized the truth. Izuku couldn't confirm it. The secret of One for All, the vestiges AIM, it was a burden he had to carry alone. He couldn't share it, not even with All Might's other protege, not even with his oldest rival. "I'm just trying to get better control of my quirk, Kaken," Izuku said, his gaze dropping to the floor. It was the truth, but it was a carefully curated, infuriatingly incomplete version of it. "Liar!" Bakugo spat, the word laced with years of frustration. He jabbed a finger into Izuku's chest hard. You've been lying since you got a quirk. Hiding things. Always holding back. You think I don't see it? You get this perfect mode that does the fighting for you, and now you're learning to sprinkle it into your regular moves. You think you can just leave me in the dust with some power you didn't even earn? The injustice of the accusation stung. Didn't earn? Izuku thought of his shattered bones, the endless rehabilitation, the sleepless nights spent studying, the constant fear. But he couldn't say any of that. To Bakugo's eyes, it was a magic trick, a sudden, unearned leap in skill that violated the natural order of growth and effort. It's not a trick, Kaken, Izuku said quietly. Then what is it? Bakugo demanded, his voice rising. Explain it. Explain how the useless, quirkless Deku who used to trip over his own feet can suddenly move with the kind of perfection that pros spend their whole lives trying to achieve. Tell me. Izuku had no answer he could give. He just stood there silent, which was the worst possible response. Bakugo's face contorted, a mixture of rage, betrayal, and a deep, burning frustration. He saw Izuku's silence not as a necessity, but as the ultimate act of condescension. He saw it as Deku, his eternal rival, deciding he wasn't even worthy of an explanation. Fine, Bakugo snarled, backing away. The raw anger in his eyes was replaced by something colder, sharper. A renewed razor-edged purpose. Keep your damn secrets. But don't think for a second you've won. I'll figure it out. I'll analyze every move you make. I'll break down that perfect power of yours piece by piece until I understand it better than you do. And then, I'm going to crush it. I'm going to prove that my power, earned with my own sweat and effort, is stronger than any secret cheat code you've got. He turned and stalked down the hallway, the promise hanging in the air like the scent of nitroglycerin. The rivalry between them had always been a frantic race. Now, it had changed. For Bakugo, it was no longer just about being number one. It was about solving the puzzle of Deku and proving it was inferior. It had become personal on a whole new level. As Izuku stood there, the tension slowly draining out of him, another figure emerged from a side corridor. Shoto Todoroki had clearly been there for a few moments, having overheard the end of the confrontation. He walked past Izuku, pausing only for a moment. His expression was, as always, difficult to read. But his heterochromatic eyes were fixed on Izuku with a keen, analytical curiosity. He wasn't angry like Bakugo. He was intrigued. Midoriya, he said, his voice calm and even. Your control has improved. I noticed it in class yesterday. Your focus is different. He tilted his head slightly. It seems more instinctual. With that simple, probing observation, he continued on his way, leaving Izuku alone in the hallway. The encounter left Izuku feeling more isolated than ever. Bakugo's furious declaration of war and Todoroki's cool, dissecting gaze were two sides of the same coin. His power was no longer just his own concern. It was a mystery his rivals were determined to solve. He was no longer just trying to master his quirk. He was now in a desperate race to understand it before they did. The whispers of the vestiges in his soul were now competing with the watchful eyes of his classmates, and the wires of his new, instinctual power were pulling him into a future far more complicated than he had ever imagined.